Leafs trade Ovechkin in a fourth
Yo,
for
isn't
Duor.
that Q's boy?
That was Q's boy. I remember Q being
That was
hyped up
my
about him.
boy, bro. I'm still high on this guy. He was doing good in the AHL too,
He's
man.
actually
Like, what
pretty good. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh my god.
He wasn't getting
Oh
consistent
my
ice
god,
time with the
man.
Marlies though. Like I'm pretty sure they were like putting him in and out of the lineup over there in the AHL.
No, you're right. You're right. But the deal is that he had lots of skill, and he had steps to make. And
True.
okay, here's the deal. When I first saw this trade happening, it was the war for like a fourth,
Yeah.
It was
and
just
then I see that they're adding Ovechkin. Yeah, so I was like, you know what? That's fair, right? This guy's a fourth liner. He's a fourth liner, and then you add, like, he's not good now, but he has a really high ceiling prospect to the deal, and now it just looks weak. You know?
I did hear that Ovechkin was gonna go back to the KHL after this season. Like he wasn't gonna stick with the Marlies.
I heard that too.
Year. So, he's sticking with the Marlies for the rest of this season. But Ovechkin is just another one of those guys where, like, the Leafs have too many prospects that are similar to him. Like Ty Voigt is basically Canadian Ovechkin. You know what I mean? Like 5'9", a diminutive forward with a ton of skill, who just needs to adjust to North American ice. I like the player, but I think Connor DeWar, only 24 years old, RFA control. He penalty kills, he hits, he's not afraid to fight. Like he's like a really solid addition to the bottom six. He wasn't super noticeable today. I think there was one goal that we allowed where I think he could have been a little bit more aggressive. I think he just doesn't know the system too well just yet. But I think he could be a really, really nice piece. And if you look at the team going forward, if you have Dewar, if you have Dewar, Nyes, McMahon as sub 30-year-old depth options going forward, with Minton and Cowan coming up in the next 2 years, like you've got an influx of young options, right? And we were talking about how this team needs more speed, how this team is super slow. The best way to fix that is bringing in young guys with energy, with fresh legs, like McMahon. Like McMahon's been a breath of fresh air. Like I wasn't the highest on the guy, but man, like he's good for 1 to 2 power drives to the net a game. Like we haven't had a guy like that in our bottom six since like Kadri, like a guy who can just take the puck and just go to the net and just drive the net, right? Like create his own offense. Like for years we've had Engvall, who's like a perimeter player. Kerfoot's another perimeter player. Like having some of these younger guys with term that we can like extend to have some continuity in the lineup. Like I really think that Dewar could be like a long-term option for the Leafs. And if the price is only a 4th-round pick, and obviously Ovechkin's a great prospect, but probably one that's not going to crack the Leafs in the next 2 to 3 years, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it because the thing is, I trust our scouting team. I trust them to find another Ovechkin in the 6th or 7th round. So I'm not too broken up about it. But I know that's your boy, so you know what? I'm sad for you.
Sorry. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, here's the deal. There's a lot of players that have come up, and this is what I mean about the Leafs, like management of their own assets. They have a lot in that locker room that they're not using right. Robertson's in the AHL right now, by the way. So like and everyone was scared. Oh, it's because he's going to get traded. That didn't end up happening. That's a lot of value that's sitting in the AHL. That's a really, really good player. He was showing a lot of light when he was up playing with Tavares and McMahon, actually. So, yeah, first of all, that was a great line. And second of all, like you have a great player like Dewar. He's on the 4th line right now, and I think that's not a great place to have him because with the way that what's his name, Kampf, Reeves, and whether it was Holmberg, I saw Yarncroke down there sometimes, but though he's mostly been in the tops on the 3rd line. It's a bit of a waste of a player who could be more, if you know what I mean, because
Yeah.
he hasn't played in an expanded role before this, but with the way the Leafs have their team set up, they have Tavares on the fourth line, and Duer's a really quick guy who plays a lot like McMahon does. Not obviously not
Yeah.
as big, not as powerful, but like put those players seem to work really well with Tavares, and Tavares, he's like I've described him this way many times before, and like Nick's agreed with me. So I think it makes me safe to say this. He's like a mini Crosby, where you know he's not really quick. He's really good with his. He's really good on his edges, uh, and he does a lot of the little things right. That's like the kind of player that elevates players that you didn't expect to be that good, and turn them into players that you know Chris Kunitz is an Olympian kind of thing. Obviously, you don't expect the same
Mhm.
from him, but even though he's getting older, he still has that kind of presence, and that's what turned McMahon and Robertson that line into such a force because they were pretty decent defensively because of how quick they were. And obviously Tavares is fairly responsible, and uh, I think that's what Dewar should be doing right now, playing with Tavares, and hopefully when Robertson comes back up, because I still don't know why they haven't done that yet. Um, he can fit in there too. But
I'm
yeah,
not gonna lie, I'm really, really intrigued on Robertson, Matthews, Nylander first line, and then you stick with Bertuzzi and Domi, but you put Mitch with them because like the Mitch Domi connection really worked when Tavares and was sick. So I think you try that line, and then you go third line with Nyes, Tavares, and McMahon because Nyes and McMahon looked really, really good tonight. They're both great puck hunters. I think those three guys would be great along the boards in front of the net. All three of them will be great forecheckers. I think McMahon and Nyes bring a little bit of the play driving that Tavares might not be as strong at anymore. Um, and I don't think any of those three are disasters defensively. I think Robertson is still a little bit shaky defensively just because of his contact balance and how quickly he gets to pucks in the defensive zone to break them out. Like he doesn't break them out consistently. And then you go fourth line with Dewar, Camp, and Holmberg. Like for me, that's the ideal. And then you rotate Reeves in whenever you need like an extra oomph to the lineup instead of Holmberg. But like I think that's like a forward setup that Sheldon should really look at. And then defensively, you just gotta find a way to get Benny back in there. Like if you had to platoon him with Edmondson, like alternate them, so be it. But I really think Benoit has played well enough that he deserves to continue to play for the team. It's just hard when you've brought in a guy like Edmondson and paid a third round pick to justify only playing him in 50% of the games for the rest of the season. So that's where the balance is going to have to be found.
my issue with what's happening on the defensive core is whoever's sitting out, it's either one of Benoit and LIljgren, and those have been two of the bright sides of the defensive core. That's been shaky at times during the season. So, and you're doing it for a guy who's really not that good at playing hockey. So that's my issue with it. They seem to have found a good balance before the deadline, and then they kind of mess it up with bringing in, you know, tough guys. And Benoit, I mean, Benoit is that, right? And it's not like Liljegren's a wimp either, right? And he's a really good puck moving defenseman, and they just need to give him a role, and they kind of take that away now because he's playing on the third pair again rather than being with Brody. But
I'll say this about Lilligan and Robertson, who are two guys that I'm still a huge fan of, but there are certain flaws to their game that make it a little bit difficult. And I don't agree with it because I think the only way that they can learn and grow in those perspectives is by continuing to play through them. But I can also see why it's hard for a Keith to trust them because like with Robertson, it's the contact balance, right? He's not super strong on pucks because he's a smaller guy. He's not super strong on his skates. He gets pushed around a little bit. And he's not great at breaking pucks out sometimes with sustained pressure. And he's a bit slow on forechecking sometimes. He doesn't get to the spot super well. And so those are like some areas where if you're playing in the top six, and you have guys like Matthews and Marner, and like your job is kind of to be the trigger man, and you're not going to be spending too much time in the defensive zone, and you can kind of like make some mistakes and it'll be okay because those two guys can carry the play. Like, sure, but when you're playing in the bottom six on a playoff team, it's hard for Keefe to give you a longer leash when you're making those kinds of mistakes. It's why a guy like McMahon and Nyes get a little bit of a longer leash than a guy like Nick Robertson does because they're big, they're physical, um, they're great at stick checking, they're great on the forecheck. So when they make defensive lapses, there's still other areas of the game that are overtly positive to a playoff team, even when they're not scoring. Whereas with Robbo, the issue becomes if he's not a guy that's putting the puck in the back of the net, he's not really a super impactful player, especially given the tendencies to make mistakes in the defensive zone. But on one hand, like I mentioned earlier, I think you can only really fix those issues when when you get to play through them. And Robertson's never really gone an extended period of a season or even half a season to play through those issues and learn from them and grow. But if you're a team in the playoff hunt like Toronto is, you can't continue to put out a guy who's struggling defensively and not scoring goals offensively in your bottom six, right? And then with LIljgren, it just becomes when LIljgren's on his game, he's Toronto's best defenseman. Like I think he's better than Morgan Riley. Like when if Morgan Riley is just average Morgan Riley, but Timothy LIljgren is like at his best, Timothy LIljgren I think is better than Morgan Riley. And that's why a lot of the times this season I've called for LIljgren to get power play one over Morgan Riley because I think he's good enough to play that role. The issue is when he's not on, he's not great because he's not super physical. He doesn't clear the net super well, and he can't take a hit to make a play. And that's one area where Morgan Riley is great at it. Labushkin's actually not bad at it. TJ Brody has struggled with it, and Liljegren struggles with it. Where if you're going up against a tight forecheck and guys are putting their bodies into you and they're not giving you really a lot of space to kind of process and pick where you want to put the puck, Liljegren really struggles with breaking the puck out. And there's a lot of forced turnovers in those games. And that's part of the reason why he doesn't really get extended runs in the playoffs. Because we've historically the Atlantic Division has always had super hard forechecking teams. Tampa, Boston, Florida, all three of those teams make their money off the forecheck, and Liljegren really struggles against that. So on one hand, it's like when Liljegren's confident and he's playing with that little bit of swagger, he's arguably Toronto's best or second best defenseman. But that inconsistency is what really like grates with me. But again, it's like a situation where he's not going to be able to overcome that unless you let him play through it in the playoffs, right? Like you let him like make a couple mistakes, but keep him in the lineup so he can adjust. But at the same time, if you're Sheldon Keefe, you're like it's the playoffs. Like I can't afford to lose a game if Liljegren makes mistakes, right? And it's like maybe I should opt for the veteran that I trust. And that's what's happened every single year. He always goes back to Labushkin over Liljegren. He always goes back to who was it last season that they benched?
Justin Hall.
Justin Hall, yeah, like he always opts for the guy, like the veteran that he trusts, the guy who's physical, who can take a hit, right? Liljegren's a little bit like anti-contact. Like that's like my biggest thing with him and Brody. They're great at stick checking. Neither of them are great skaters, but Liljegren's got a bit more confidence. And both of them just don't like contact. They don't like hitting people. They don't like cross-checking people. They don't clear the net very well. And that's kind of like a little bit of a weak point that gets highlighted in a playoff series when those traits are really important. That's why I don't hate the Edmondson move because I think Edmondson and Liljegren could be a really good pair because Edmondson kind of complements what Liljegren doesn't do super well, and he's really good at only those things, which is hit and cross check and make a simple pass under pressure. You know what I mean?
But like my deal now is that Keith's had to is choosing between Liljegren and Benoit, and one of those. First of all, like the handedness doesn't work out. Second of all, Benoit does the exact same thing, does he not? Right. So like, why did?
Yeah,
why
but it also comes down to Benoit has zero playoff experience, right?
Yeah.
So again, Keefe, you know how Keefe really values that. Edmonton's gone on 2 cup runs with St. Louis and Montreal, right? So he's got the playoff pedigree. And Benoit's never played high leverage hockey before. He's always played on really shitty Anaheim teams. I mean, yeah, like you know, it's weird with LIljgren and Robertson. I think both of them have the talent to play on a playoff team, but I think their weaknesses get exacerbated in the playoffs because what they're not super great at are sometimes what people really tend to think are the most important traits in the playoffs, right? So it's tough, but I think that if Keefe would let them play through it and give them the confidence to make mistakes and learn from them and grow from them, that those two guys could be top 4 and top 6 pieces on a cup winning team. That's why I floated the idea of Robertson with Matthews and Nylander because I think that's a line that could really work. You got 3 finishers with all 3 of them, but you let Nylander be the play driver, and Robertson doesn't have as much pressure to have to do anything. Like he can just be the trigger man and learn kind of focus on the defensive end of the game, right? Whereas I think on the third line with Tavares and McMahon, he has to be a little bit of a play driver, a little bit of a facilitator, but his best trait is really his shooting. So like, he wants to do that. And he doesn't really have support because if he's taking it in, like Tavares usually isn't fast enough to get up there with him. And with LIljgren, I like the pairing with him and Edmondson. I think that's a pairing that works. I really wish that Benny had a spot. I think if Benoit shot right, he'd be in the lineup next to Morgan Riley right now. I think that's what it comes down to. If Benoit could shoot right-handed, he'd be on the Leafs right now, and Lyljgren would be the 7th defenseman. But unfortunately, he doesn't shoot right, and that's what's keeping him out. But I'm sure he's going to platoon in. I think Keefe's going to do a lot of different combinations here in the next little bit to try to find a formula that works. And I think Benoit is part of the long-term plan for the Leafs, whereas Edmondson might not see this team past next season. So I wouldn't be too concerned about Benoit. I like him a lot. I wanted the Leafs to sign him in the offseason, but I think Keefe doesn't quite trust him in a playoff moment just yet. I think that's why they went and got Edmondson.
See, and that's fair enough. But the issue is, this is my issue with management, is every time they find something good, they switch out of it. Like they had a good thing going with their defensive pairings before, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Benoit because obviously he was on the third pair anyway. But with the way that what are they called? Brody and LIljgren were playing together. First of all, Brody was amazing. That was something that we didn't have for the whole season. He was playing with Riley, and he was like, they just didn't work together anymore. Like Riley was worse and Brody was worse, and it seemed like at points of time, like Brody was nothing without Riley, which is kind of backwards to be honest. Um,
Sometimes they were somehow worse together, like than when they were apart.
Exactly.
If that makes sense. Like
exactly, and like obviously that's not what they have now. Lyljgren's there, and I don't. First of all, I'm not really happy with that either because you know I don't want Lyljgren. I don't want a bad player next to Riley, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
That's why I wanted LIljgren to have a chance with Riley. I thought that would have worked really well. It's a fast pairing. They move together. They'll be able to move together really well. But like you said, it's with the way Keefe has his team. Well, he wants to set his team up. He can't trust LIljgren to play big minutes like Riley does. And obviously, it's different when he gets into the playoffs and he turns on another gear. So hopefully he does that again, and him and Lyljgren doesn't look that bad. But I don't. I think LIljgren, the Leafs need. You can't just go with one defenseman. Every single team that's won the Stanley Cup has 2 defensemen. You're back when it was St. Louis. They had Parayko and Pietrangelo. Colorado had
Quarantays, Hedman, and Sergachev with the Tampa Cups.
Yep.
Trying to think what else won a cup there. I mean, the only one I can think of that didn't really have 2 was probably the Pittsburgh Cups because it was kind of Letang and Committee.
Yeah,
right? Like that would.
but the thing is, is that like Crosby was so dominant where it didn't even matter at tough points. So
Yeah, but, like that's what I mean. Like I feel like a Toronto Stanley Cup would have to be with how the roster is constructed right now. Would have to be a Sidney Crosby Penguins Cup type of championship, if that makes sense. Like we need Austin Matthews, or Mitch Marner, or William Nylander to be
or all of the
unbeatable,
above.
or all of the above. Because because you gotta think about like the Cup champs, the last the 2016 Pittsburgh Penguins when they won the Cup, their top four guys I think were Malkin, Crosby, Kessel, and
Sheary.
and Letang or Sheary. I'm trying to remember in terms of points. But like put that up against Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Riley. Like like the Leafs.
It shouldn't be close, right?
That's what I mean. Like the Leafs should be walking these guys, and like the talent is there. It's just like we need to see them. We need to see them be able to carry the team like that, right? And like to be fair, like Pittsburgh got some hot goaltending from Fleury and Murray in those years, right? So their goaltending I think is better than what Toronto's is. But like the bottom six on that team and the defense, I wouldn't say is just demonstratively better than what Toronto's team, what Toronto has. Like the Washington Capitals when they won the Stanley Cup, like it was what their blue line was what John Carlson and Michael Kempney was his defense partner. I don't even remember who. Like maybe they had Niskanen and
Orlov.
Lake, but like and or fair Orlov is really good. Um, but like I don't know, man. Like I feel like the Leafs have the baseline of what it takes to win a cup. They just need that baseline to be at that level, you know, to reach there to kind of be world beaters. I keep coming back to that point. Like if your stars aren't world beaters, you're not going to be able to win. Like that's just how it's going to go.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, Matthews, like, genuinely has the tools to be the best player ever, and this is saying something because you don't see someone so defensively dominant and like can score 70 goals. Like, obviously, there is McDavid, and he's amazing, and he does the same kind of stuff. But that just means that Matthews can do it too, you know. And it's just a matter. Hopefully, it's just a matter of time because this season he seems to be on a different level. He's fully healthy. Him and Marner seem to found another gear together. Um, and obviously you have Nylander there at all times if that doesn't work out. So I'm praying that this year is different because like the tools are there to be different, but it's up to them. And there's no one that can really like supplement them, right? Because like no matter who you put beside them, Nyes is an upgrade I think from what they've had before, but to be fair, there was Hyman at points as well, but we'll say that they were young back then. But from what they've had before, like it's not really it doesn't really change. There's nothing that a player like that can add to Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, right? So
Yeah,
it just has
like,
to be them.
that's what I mean. Like we can bring in all like think about it this way. Like I feel like the Leafs after the trade deadline this year is not really any worse than the team that left the trade deadline last year. You swap Ryan O'Reilly with Tyler Bertuzzi. You swap Alex Kerfoot with Max Domi. And then the fourth line, ZAR and Achari, get replaced with Holmberg and Dewar, right? And the defense is the exact same outside of the third pair, right? Where like it's like Edmondson and LIljgren vs Giordano and Hall. Like the defense basically looks the same because like it's like Labushkin versus Shen. Not a huge difference there, I don't think. And then Edmondson
No, not at all.
and Liljegren versus Gio and Hall. And like Gio last year was great until like post trade deadline. And then he kind of got old and he wasn't great in the playoffs. So like is Edmondson much worse than Gio was last year in the playoffs? He probably won't be. And if he is, we have Benoit, who I think is better than Hall, right?
Yep.
So like and the goaltending is the exact same. So like the idea that the Leafs are like demonstratively worse than they were last year after the trade deadline is just false. Like Ryan O'Reilly, I think is much better than Burt in terms of production, but Ryan O'Reilly wasn't really producing like an elite player in the playoffs. Like he was very very good, and I think Burt we'll have to see come playoff time. But I think in big games, Burt can be very very good. I think Domi is more impactful than Kerfoot. I think Kerfoot's more versatile than Domi, but I think Domi is much stronger offensively, which has been Toronto's issue in the playoffs.
And if you want someone
And
versatile, you have Yarncroke.
that's what I'm saying,
So
right? Like, and Dewar is a guy who's pretty versatile, and Kampf can play a defensive role, right? Like the
and
team has
McMahon now
gotten better
too.
defensively, and with McMahon too. Like, I don't think this team is much worse, right? And
If
the
anything,
idea
it's
is
better. Yeah,
just
you're right.
so at the end of the day, the idea is just if you're good enough to win the Stanley Cup, like if my idea is if you're not good enough with this team to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, right? Adding, replacing like Ilya Labushkin with like Sean Walker would not have been the difference. Like the upgrade from Labushkin to Sean Walker would not have been the difference between you losing in the second round versus the Stanley Cup final. Like the difference there is not significant enough, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
so in my mind, it's like at the end of the day, like everyone says like when you have Austin Matthews, every year should be a go for it year. Did Washington make the big move every year with Ovi?
no, fair enough.
No, right? Pittsburgh missed the playoffs with Sidney Crosby. By that logic, every year you have Sidney Crosby should be a year to buy, and they missed the playoffs that one year before Jim Rutherford came in, right? McDavid's missed the playoffs, right? Where like the team wasn't playing well and they stood pat. They didn't make a huge acquisition, right? Colorado didn't buy every single year. Tampa, until they were like really, really cup contenders, didn't buy every single year. Like this idea that you have to bring in a guy that's a top four forward and a top six forward and a top four defenseman every single year is just stupid, in my opinion. Like if the core is not good enough, it doesn't matter who you bring in. Like unless you're bringing in Kale McCarr or another superstar, it doesn't matter. Like a second liner is not going to make the difference. So end of the day, Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, gotta be world beaters. You
And
gotta
but
be better.
what I do think makes a difference is a top pairing defenseman, and that's what LIljgren could be. And the way that they're utilizing him right now is not allowing him to be that, and that's just what annoys me. Because I think LIljgren being an elite defenseman like he can does actually make a difference.
And the one thing I will say about Kiev is I do like that in recent games he's tried the Riley Liljegren combo a couple of times. Like he sprinkles it in there because I think that could be really interesting because we know already that come playoff time, the idea is we don't want to match up Mo with really tough minutes. We want to let him be dominant offensively and give him offensive zone shifts and let him feast against the bottom six of opposing teams. And we saw last year against Tampa, Brody and McCabe took on the majority of the tough shifts, right? I think that's why Keefe has gone back to them with these new acquisitions. He wants Brody and McCabe to take on the Kachucks of the world, the Ryan Harts and the Verhaeghes of the world. And then you bring in Edmondson. I think an Edmondson Labushkin pair would be terrible at breaking the puck out, but I think they'd be decent in their own zone. They'd be physical, they'd clear the net front. And then you only go to that pair when you put Riley with Liljegren in the offensive zone. Because then you've got two mobile guys, two guys that are offensive minded who have some skill, and you put them in the offensive zone. You put extra pressure on the defense, and in the next shift you go out with Labushkin and Edmondson. Let them kind of kill play for a little bit, tread water. Then you come back with McCabe and Brody to counteract the other team's best players. And then you go back with Riley Labushkin, Edmondson, Liljegren. until you see another opportunity to put Riley with Liljgren again, if that makes sense, right? It's like matchup, right? Um, I think that could be really interesting because it takes a bit of pressure off Liljgren. He doesn't always have to face be lining up in defensive zone face-offs and defensive zone starts. He gets some opportunity to kind of get a little bit of confidence, find a little bit of space, utilize some of his offensive skills and capabilities. Um, and then you kind of like let the physical guys do some of the grunt work, keep your two puck moving defensemen, more fresh. So I think that could be an option for sure. I like Robertson, but I something tells me he's an off-season trade. I think he's gonna get moved this off-season. Um,
which really hurts because he could really add to a team.
yeah, but I just don't think with Cowan coming up, I just don't think he finds that spot on the Leafs because I think Cowan and Nyes are gonna lock up the top two left wing spots on this team, and you obviously have Marner and Nylander on the other wing. Robertson can't play center, and I just
Cowan can
don't
play
think
center
he's
too.
ever. Hmm? Cowan can play center, but I don't think they want him to play center to start off. Not when you got a guy like Tavares who can play center. When you have Dewar who can play center and Camp who can play center, who will realistically all be under contract next year, right? So if Cowan makes the team, I'd pencil him in at two left wing. Um, and if that's the case, like Robertson, you're thinking he's only going to be able to get third line minutes at best, and keep on a Keith team, the guy's not going to have a long leash. This is what's going to be. He's not physical enough. He doesn't forecheck well enough. He doesn't win puck battles consistently enough. Like Keith is going to have a leash about as short as Kai Sinat when it comes to this guy. Like you make one mistake, you're sitting. You're sitting. You make one mistake, you're getting sent to the press box. And I don't think he's ever going to reach his potential with that. And so I think when he still has value, I think if there's a move to be had for either a 2C or a top four right-handed defenseman, and the stick up is we don't want to give up Nick Robertson, I think you give up Nick Robertson. I love the kid. I think he could be great, but I don't think he can be great here. And at that point, you might as well cash him in for someone who could be great here. You know?
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and that's the issue because like if he's given the opportunity, he's definitely good enough, right? But he's just not been given the opportunity.
Yeah.
I think that's the
I like
that's
the-
the issue with LIljgren too. But yeah,
Yeah.
anyways.
And like the big thing is like sometimes like we like a lot of people think that, but also like for example like Philip Zadina was a guy for like a long time where people were like, oh, like he just needs an opportunity, he just needs a change of scenery and he'll be great. But there's no guarantee. Like we think he will be, but there's no guarantee that he will be. And if we can get someone who we know is established as like a Matt Waugh, like if, for example, if what Matt Waugh like was available like for let's say he had like a guy like Matt Waugh wasn't a pending UFA but he had one more year at the end of his contract and LA was like, hey, we want to trade him. Like I trade Nick Robertson in a deal for him in a heartbeat because like Matt Waugh would fit perfectly with Morgan Riley. That's a difference maker, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting we trade Nick Robertson for a bag of peanuts, right? But I'm saying right now he's still magic beans because he hasn't really become like a top six scorer like we hoped he would be, right? And if we can trade in our magic beans for a BMW, like I trade it because the magic beans could be a Ferrari, but they could also just be it could just be a bean, right? Like you don't know what you're getting yet with Nick Robertson, and on a team that's trying to win the Stanley Cup, a BMW does a whole lot more for you than some beans. So, you know, I like the kid. I really do. I want him to be successful, but long term, I just don't see it with the Leafs. I just don't think he can. All right. Well, thank you, boys, for listening in on our Leafs talk. To like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.